Good morning, Year 4. I hope you've had a great week of home learning so far, and we're going to start our next English lesson. Okay, so today's lesson, our learning objective is to use complex sentences in my writing. So I want you to pause the video and write today's date and learning objective in your book and make sure these are underlined. Okay, great. So today in our writing, we're thinking about using those complex sentences that you've been learning about this week and fronted adverbials as well. So today we're going to be writing the final paragraph of our ant story. I'm just going to say now, this is really important, that when we write our final paragraph, we're going to break that paragraph up into 3 different chunks like we normally do. So we do chunk 1, chunk 2 and chunk 3. And the reason we break up our paragraph is to think about what we want to include in each sentence of our paragraph. So three chunks, 3 sentences, but it is 1 paragraph. So you write these sentences one after the other together in 1 paragraph as they are all linked. So let's think about today we're going to be collecting words and parts of sentences as part of our jotting work. So I thought it might be helpful if you want to organise your page a bit like this. So if you draw a line through the middle of your page, and then you can split the top half into chunk 1, chunk 2 and chunk 3, and that's where you could collect your jottings today. And then the bottom part of your page can be when you write your paragraph, and then you've got all the information you need, all the nice words that you're going to use, the vocabulary above, that you can spot those really easily. So if you want to organise your page like this, pause the video now while you have a go at doing that. Okay, fantastic. So yesterday you learnt about complex sentences. So let's just have a think about what we learnt yesterday about complex sentences. So we know a complex sentence has a main clause in it, and it also has a subordinate clause. And the subordinate clause often starts with a subordinate conjunction. So the subordinate clause is part of the sentence, and it doesn't make sense on its own. The main clause does make sense on its own. So here are some examples of subordinate conjunctions that you might use in your writing. And your clauses, they're made up of a subject and a verb. So below is a sentence, it's a complex sentence I'm going to read to you, and we're going to have a think about which is the main clause, the subordinate conjunction in this sentence. So the sentence is, as the anteater inhaled deeply, the queen ant ordered her troops to form a ball. So just pause the video and think, which do you think is the main clause? Which do you think is a subordinate clause, and which do you think is a subordinate conjunction in that sentence? And if you want to think about which the subject and the verb is in the main clause, that would be great. Okay, so pause the video while you do that. Brilliant. Okay, let's have a think. So the first part of the sentence, so as the anteater inhaled deeply, there's a bit of a clue there because it starts with as, which is our subordinate conjunction. Now we know that the subordinate clause starts with the subordinate conjunction there, so that's a bit of a clue that that first part of the sentence is the subordinate clause, as the anteater inhaled deeply. And it doesn't make sense on its own because we need to know what happens as the anteater inhaled deeply. So that second part of the sentence is the main clause, which is the queen ant ordered her troops to form a ball. And if you had to think about what the subject is in that part of the sentence, the subject is the queen ant, and the verb is she ordered, so she's ordering her troops. So that is an example of a complex sentence, and the sentences you wrote yesterday will really help you today with your writing. So we're thinking about the final plot point of our ant story today. So I'm going to remind you of the animation so we can have a think about what's happening in the very final part of our story today. So let's see if I can get the animation working today. Okay, so here is the animation. Okay, so in the final part of our animation, we've got the team, they're working together and they're following the orders of the queen ant, which means the threat is avoided. So it's the teamwork saves the day. So if we think about whether we think that's a positive part of the story or a negative part of the story, as they're saving the day, aren't they? They're stopping the ants from being eaten by the anteater. So that's a really positive part of the story. So our writing's going to reflect that today. So we're going to plot that up here on our graph to think about it's the positive ending to the story. So our chunk one today. So let's think about our chunk one. So in our chunk one, I want you to think about what subordinating conjunctions you could use to start your writing. So for this part of our sentence, this first sentence in chunk one, I want you to try and start with a subordinating conjunction. So think back to your work yesterday and jot down some ideas. What subordinating conjunctions could you use to start a sentence? So we're describing the sentence we're writing is how when the ant ball is formed and it starts moving towards the anteater. So how could you start that sentence? Pause the video now while you jot down some subordinating conjunctions. Okay, great. So I'm going to share that I've come up with that I might use in my writing today. So I could start my sentence using as. I could use when. I might use while. Although, be a nice one to start with. Or I could use after. So those are all different ideas of how I could start my sentence using a subordinating conjunction. So we're going to use a subordinating conjunction and then we're going to use a prepositional phrase to describe the action of the ball. So remember, those prepositions are all the words that describe where or how something starts moving. So it might move, we're thinking about it moving along the floor, across the ground. So think about a prepositional phrase to describe the action of the ant ball and how it's moving and where it's moving. So pause the video now and write down some ideas of prepositional phrases that might help you in your writing today. Okay, brilliant. So I'm going to share with you again some of my ideas, and you can magpie these ideas, remember, so use them in your own writing if you need to. So prepositional phrases. So I've written towards anteater. So the ball rolls towards the giant anteater. It's moving into the deadly trap. So it's moving into the deadly trap. Okay. Along the dusty path, so the ball rolls along the dusty path. And finally, across the hard ground. Okay. So all examples there of prepositional phrases, and I've tried to describe the nouns at the end there by using words like giant, deadly, dusty and hard. So I've got some noun phrases in there as well, which will make your writing a bit more exciting. So I'm going to show you the model that I've written using these ideas here to write my first chunk of this paragraph. So my sentence is, as the queen ant had cleverly anticipated, the giant ant ball began to roll closer towards the sucking giant. So in my model, I've used the subordinating conjunction as. So I've started my sentence with as. And then the prepositional phrase I've used here is towards the sucking giant. Okay, so I've got a prepositional phrase, I've got the subordinating conjunction as, and this is a complex sentence. And remember to separate your main clause and your subordinating clause. I've used a comma there, so think about the punctuation in your complex sentence. So now I want you to pause the video and have a go at writing your first chunk. Okay, fantastic. So let's think now about our second chunk of writing, So for the second part of the writing, so now we're thinking about chunk 2, and this is where the anteater, the ant ball, is being sucked by the anteater. So we're thinking about now describing the action of the ant ball. Okay, so we're describing what happens to the ant ball. So we're thinking about it being sucked up by that menacing anteater there. So I think so I want you to think about describing the action of the ant ball. So pause the video and write down some ideas to describe the action of the ant ball and the anteater here. So write down now in your chunk 2 jottings. Okay, so we might describe the action as rolling quickly. So it's rolling quickly towards that anteater. We could use a better verb, maybe tumbling towards. And we could use faster and faster. So those are some ideas of different words to describe the action of the ant ball. Now, to think about including a complex sentence, I'm going to use another subordinating conjunction. So the conjunction I'm going to use is until. So if we're thinking about describing the action of the ant ball rolling towards them, and then we're going to try and use the word until now to describe what the anteater does with its mouth. So now you think about using some noun phrases to describe the anteater's mouth, what happens. So we're thinking about the anteater where he's sucking up that ball. So can you describe the anteater's mouth using some noun phrases? So remember to think about some exciting adjectives to describe the anteater's mouth. Pause the video now while you write down your ideas. Okay, so let's have a think. My ideas of different noun phrases to describe the anteater's mouth. We could describe it as its enormous mouth. So enormous mouth. We could use some alliteration there, thinking about its hollow, hungry mouth. We could use menacing, mighty mouth there. So another great example of alliteration. So for our next chunk of writing then, we're thinking about describing the action of the ball rolling towards the anteater until, and then we're just going to describe the anteater's mouth sucking up that ant ball, or blocking, the ant ball is blocking the mouth. So here's my model that I've written of this next chunk of writing. So my sentence is, faster and faster it rolled until the sphere had blocked the giant's menacing, mighty mouth. So in that sentence, we've got the action of the ant ball, so faster and faster it rolled, and then we've got our subordinating conjunction there, until the sphere had blocked the giant's menacing, mighty mouth. And then we've got our noun phrase at the bottom, and our noun phrase has got alliteration. So that's your deepening the moment today, is to have a go at using alliteration to describe in your writing to make it more exciting. So pause the video now while you write chunk 2, and remember this is still part of the same paragraph. So just carry on your writing straight after chunk 1 to write to chunk 2 now. Okay, fantastic. So let's now have a think about chunk 3 of our writing. So we're going to start chunk 3 of our writing thinking about using a fronted adverbial to describe the manner in which the anteater falls to the floor. So now we're thinking about how does that anteater fall to the floor? So we could think about is it all of a sudden the anteater falls to the floor? Without hesitation, the anteater falls to the floor. Pause the video now and have a go at writing some ideas for a fronted adverbial to describe the manner in which the anteater falls to the floor. Okay, brilliant. Let's have a look at my ideas then that you could magpie for your writing if you need to. So I might start that sentence with the fronted adverbial, say it's falling onto the dusty floor. Plummeting down to the hard ground. Collapsing in exhaustion. Or toppling towards the ground. So all of these fronted adverbials are describing how, the manner in which the anteater falls to the floor. So I want you to have a go at writing when you write your chunk 3, have a go at using a fronted adverbial. So here's my modelled example of my chunk 3, my final sentence to describe what happens to this anteater. So I've used toppling onto the dusty floor, the enormous creature passed out on the ground. So I've used the verb toppling there just to make it a bit more exciting than falling. I've used a noun phrase here, dusty floor. So this first part of my sentence is my adverbial phrase, toppling onto the dusty floor. And then remember, I've got my comma after my fronted adverbial here, and then the enormous creature passed out on the ground. So that's what's, I'm finishing off that sentence by saying what has happened to the anteater. So now it's your turn to write your final chunk of this paragraph. And if you want to have a go at challenging yourself, you could think of a simile to describe how the anteater falls to the floor. So pause the video now while you have a go at writing your final chunk. Okay, brilliant. And then it's always a good idea to read through what you have written all together. So here is my final paragraph of my story. I'm going to read it to you. So as the queen ant had cleverly anticipated, the giant ant ball began to roll closer towards the sucking giant. Faster and faster it rolled until the sphere had blocked the giant's menacing mighty mouth. Toppling onto the dusty floor, the enormous creature passed out on the ground. So that's my final paragraph of our ant story. So read back through now your work to check that you've used those complex sentences, your fronted adverbial, and really think about where you're using punctuation in your final paragraph. Fantastic, Year 4. Well done.